Okay, I'm going to do a quick shtick on the Healthy Climate Bill. This is Legislative Council 48, not to be confused with 42, which Jim was talking about. 48 is the bill, the Healthy Climate Bill, that we have been working on extensively with across the state to get introduced. It's a sort of son of HB 3470, which was introduced and didn't quite make it through the session in 2015. Thanks very much. This bill is a cap, trade, and invest bill. And I just want to explain to you what that means in general terms. I will probably skip over the second part of this slide, which relates to the tax approach. The cap and trade approach really is the same as a cap, trade, and invest. There's no difference. We've just added a term to this, really. Basically, what this does is limit carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, measured in terms of their equivalence to carbon dioxide. It caps the greenhouse gas emissions emitted by fossil fuels from their extraction to the combustion. And we're hoping to get a complete life cycle assessment in the bill. It may not be in there right at the beginning, but we're hoping to include it so that as technology advances, we can get that incorporated. What we do is then the state issues a series of allowances for every metric, I think it's every metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalents, or million of metric tons, I'm not quite sure which category. These are the permits or allowances which are issued by the state, allowing emissions up to whatever the cap is. And these are usually auctioned off at an auction, and I think the plan here is to do that 4 times a year. The proceeds from that auction are then used to invest in renewable projects, and hence the invest part of the statement. The price of these auctions adjusts according to market principles, and as we go through year after year, the number of permits that are issued to allow for the pollution are reduced, so we keep on a target of reducing caps, and that's the statement there. So that's the basic principle of a cap, trade, and invest program. Does that make sense? The greenhouse fee or tax system approaches it a slightly different way. It simply charges a rate for the emissions that are consequent upon fossil fuel combustion. So I'll just jump through that one very quickly, and I won't spend time on it. The Healthy Climate Bill is the one that we are focusing on in this session. The session starts February the 1st, and it's a short session, so we have to get this bill out of committee during the first week. It follows the following sequence of targets. By 2025, we should have emissions 20% below 1990 levels. By 2035, 45% below, and 75% below by 2050. The reason for these magic numbers is that in 2007, a resolution was passed in the Oregon legislature, signed by Ted Kulongoski, which established this target. And what this bill does is essentially no more than the bill that was already enacted, what's that now, 8 years ago. So it's not putting anything more strict in place than has already been there. The fact, however, was that 2007 bill was purely voluntary, and we're not on a trajectory to meet these goals. So that's the reason we need a bill. The basic idea is from 2022 onwards, every 5 years, there would be a review of the program, and the best science would be used to judge whether it's doing what it should be doing, whether it's on trajectory. The Environmental Quality Commission, through the Department of Environmental Quality, is the primary authority for managing the Healthy Climate Bill. And there are a series of advisory committees associated with it at various levels. I think there are about 4 advisory committees. making sure, if you like, that the EQ is on track. The whole bill will address the top, I think it's the top 42 emitters in the state which are responsible for the top 85% of emissions in Oregon. And this includes or comprises those entities that are responsible for over 25,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per year. So this does not include small businesses, it doesn't include agricultural activity for political reasons largely. And it does assess greenhouse gas emissions in terms of the carbon dioxide equivalents, and we're hoping, as I said, to get it over a full life cycle basis. And the reason that that's important is because you're very familiar probably with the fact that California has a cap and trade program enacted under AB 32 back in 2007, I think it was. Their program does not do full life cycle emissions, and the consequence of that is, you've heard of the Porter Ranch methane leak or methane leak? Well, that is pretty much negating California's entire cap and trade program, at least while that is emitting. And it's not being held, nobody's being held accountable for that because they don't have full life cycle emissions. That's why this is so important. And then emitters, of course, have to buy allowances at auction, and then they submit the allowances they've bought to comply with the legislation. That's the basic outline of the bill. A few more details. We're generating some funds from this bill, and those funds go somewhere. Funds that are generated from transportation fuels because of the Oregon Constitution have to go back to transportation projects, the State Highway Fund. So there's going to be a climate investment fund within the State Highway Fund, and the funds from this program go into that climate investment fund. The initial project proposal was to have 20% of those go to disadvantaged communities, 20% to projects that benefit disadvantaged communities, but they may not be inside those communities. There's a plan at the moment to adjust that so that's just lumped together as a total of 40%. The remainder is going to be allocated to stimulating greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects. It's hoped that these funds don't go for the usual construction projects, but for things that actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The utilities are in a different category, different sector. So that's the transportation sector. Now the utility sector gets a slightly different deal. They initially get some free allowances, which they return to the auction pool. That sounds a little strange, but it actually makes sense when you think about it for a second. If you're like me, you think, what the hell's that about? I finally figured it out with some help. So they get some free allowances, they go back into the pool, and those are sold along with all the other allowances, and the utilities get those funds, and they use those funds for specific goals, specific activities. One of them is to assist low-income individuals with their utility bills, because utility rates may go up as a consequence of the Healthy Climate Bill. This is to offset the costs of that for low-income Oregonians. Some of that goes for residential and small business climate credits, encouraging small businesses to install solar panels and so forth. And some of it goes to assist heavy energy users. The rules for all of this will be established by the Public Utilities Commission. And this is a key component, but this is the one that confused me. In addition to getting their free allowances, which generate funds that go to the utilities that they must spend this way, the utilities do have to buy allowances to cover the emissions that they are responsible for. Industries buy allowances at auction, and then the funds for all of that aren't earmarked already go the following way. 85% go to the Oregon Climate Investment Fund for grants to promote renewable energy. 40% of that goes to projects in disadvantaged communities, 40% to economically distressed areas. The Oregon Business Development Department defines that. And then 15% is allocated to this Just Transition Fund. That's 15%, that's the rest of this. It's not 15% of that, but that's the rest of the funds going into getting collected by the auction. That goes to the Just Transition Fund, which supports communities and individuals who are dislocated by the transition to renewable energy. The total allowances decline each year to make sure the state is on trajectory to achieve the goals that are identified initially. Does that all make sense? Anybody got any questions?
Under the one for utility assistance for intensive energy users, what kind of assistance do they need? And who are they?
I'm not sure. I think there are some entities out there that are specifically profligate in their energy use, and this helps them to reduce the cost of the program. And I'm not sure that I think that's a good idea, but it's one of those things that's probably politically astute. Helga.
The transportation funds, does any of that go towards possibly public transit or bike?
I think my first glib response to that is I hope so. The question was, does any of this transportation money go to public transport? We hope so, but I don't know. Pam, are you familiar with the state legislatures?
I haven't seen that level of detail yet.
Okay, I have a suspicion, I'm not 100% sure, but I have a suspicion that there may be constitutional provisions against that, but I'm not sure. Yes, I just wonder, oh my God, no, not that too. I think so, but I'm not sure. So I'm sure we would hope that they go to public transit if that's possible, but it may be that we have to allocate them in ways that are controlled by the Constitution, which has peculiar requirements in this arena. Paul?
You mean the Oregon Constitution?
Yes. Yeah, there are some strange things in the Oregon Constitution. Any other questions that I might be able to try? Right.
Alan, I'm trying to understand if this bill is going to be self-sustaining to help reduce carbon to the target levels, or is it just, it's going to raise money that's going to get moved around to different places, and the major emitters are going to have to invest some of their own funds to meet these targets?
So your question is the bill going to be self-sustaining, or are the emitters going to have to take steps to change their behavior? I would hope the latter, but what the bill does is provide incentives through these allowances to encourage utilities to switch from the fossil fuel to renewable energy.
And that's what I was having a hard time understanding, how this money is distributed, how much of that incentive is going to be applied.
Well, the incentives are to encourage projects that do that convert to renewable energy and potentially provide tax credits, I'm guessing, for solar farms or for
So these
wind.
projects have a identity in terms of ultimately helping to reduce the carbon impact.
That the projects that are supported by these funds should, according to the stipulations of the bill, they should be directed
Because you
to
know how it is,
reducing
once you get a
emissions.
revenue stream, people put their hands in them, and you know how much of it is going to actually end up doing what we want to do.
There is always that question, and that's going to be.
The bad question.
Yeah.
Alan?
Yeah.
California's had a pretty considerable success with this program. Can you speak to that at all?
I am not as, the question was about California's program. What I will say about California's program, and I'm not very familiar with the details, it has done two things which are critical and are important for most people, and that is, one, it has reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and the second thing is it has not, as you will hear constantly refrain as a criticism of this whole trend, it has not tanked the California economy. In fact, the California economy has been growing since the inception of the cap and trade program. And is that where you were going?
Plus, the growth in solar in California is geometric at this point.
Yes, and it has stimulated in California renewable energy technology. That's very true. But the same thing that's happened in California has also happened in the regional greenhouse gas initiative states out east, which included New Jersey until Chris Christie pulled it out. But they have exhibited a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and they have also exhibited increase in their economic growth. And even to the extent that in several of those cases, the states that have the cap and trade program have done better than the surrounding states that don't in an economic sense. Did I see a question? Yeah.
I'm pretty new to this, so this question may be a bit silly, but the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Correct.
I'm assuming that these are the primary industry sectors that are responsible for it. And something in me is saying, but I thought that husbandry and agriculture also contribute significantly to that. And so, am I wrong on that, or is that?
So the question is, where does agriculture fit into this? And I will admit that it was only relatively recently that I started becoming aware of the potential contribution of agricultural activities to the problem. And I think that awareness is not necessarily shared by everybody who's involved in this discussion. So I think one of the reasons that we're not addressing agriculture is because it's harder to address. We're talking about industrial agriculture in one perspective, and the problem of cow farts and cow belches in another. So those are very much harder to address, I think, than our utilities and transportation emissions, because we can really
Control that better?
we can get a handle on that much more easily. And I've seen a lot of data recently suggesting that agriculture contributes variously. I've heard up to 50%. I suspect it's not that high, but I think it's probably higher than the standard identifications of the amount of emissions that come from agriculture, which is somewhere around 8 to 10%. I think that doesn't really account for a lot of the industrial agriculture, the destruction of soil organic matter, which ends up as carbon dioxide if we mismanage, as we tend to do. So I think to a large extent, this is being targeted because it's possible to do it. Does that sort of answers your question, but not in a very satisfactory way, I think.
No, I mean, it looks like there's a whole other segment of our production as humans that's creating the problem, and we're not quite looking at it or holding it accountable.
Well, what criteria goes into the targets? Was agriculture excluded from that as well?
I think that the question was, is agriculture excluded? And I think the answer to that is essentially yes, because there's probably not a single agricultural activity that's responsible for the emissions to fall into the category of 25,000 annual tons of carbon dioxide. Jim, did you want to offer a thought on this?
Yeah, of course, I come from one of the leading cow countries, and I am a cowboy, by the way. And we got 86,000 cow-calf pairs, and when they fart, that's a lot of carbon emissions. It's methane, actually. But you have to separate the biotic and the abiotic in the debate. Now, what we did in our carbon plan, we calculated all the agricultural inputs from hay combines, balers, trucking cattle, all that. We did not get into the abiotic of the actual cow's emissions. And I use this justification on that. It isn't the abiotic. The abiotic was here when buffalo were here and before and other things. It's been the fossil fuel emissions that have caused our problems. And so I'd probably be out on a rail and feathered in Lake County if I got up and said, diaper all the cows or do whatever you do with a cow, or get rid of them, So that's how I've approached it. I don't know if that's the right thing, but I approach it from that abiotic to the biotic and look at where the problem was. And if we can reach these goals on the abiotic emissions from transportation and energy and other things like that, we don't need to mess with the other part. Today, maybe down the road, but let's get there first, and then argue the more difficult ones later. That's my piece of that. And you're getting that from a biased cow person, so, okay?
Eric, did you want to comment, contribute?
Well, I just was remembering back when the General Clean Air Act addressed the easy stuff first, that's point sources, and even the Clean Water Act, Section 208, the non-point sources of agricultural runoff and things that were much harder to pinpoint or give permits to. I suspect this is the same kind of situation.
Do the low-hanging fruit first, essentially. Okay.
Seemed to me that part of the answer I just heard was that in terms of agriculture, at least, the fuel consumption, the use of gasoline to power their tractors and their processing, that will be covered
That is correct, yes.
within these targets.
That's a good point.
Okay.
I'm sorry, one more. Carl.
I've been working with a small company up in the state of Washington called NH3, I think it's LLD. They're working with the Colorado School of Mines, chemical engineering department, who are building a pilot plant of their patented process. And probably somewhere along the line, I think they might want to seek funding for this process that makes ammonia without any use of carbon. And there's a chance that SOCAN might be interested. I left you a couple of papers.
Yeah, I've got them here, thank you. So Carl is a proponent of ammonia as an alternative energy source, and I think we conceivably have an interest in that. Whether, I would hope that somewhere in here, the possibility of investing in exploring that technology would be appropriate, because I've done a little research into ammonia, and I'm absolutely not going to claim to be an expert, but it does seem to me to be a possible avenue that we're not even looking at in much.
The key is to use ammonia generating process that doesn't use carbon. And that's not done too much.
Okay, thanks a lot. We better move on, otherwise we won't be out of here by 7:30. And everybody knows Kathy is a stickler for being on time. So there are some things happening. If you're interested in supporting the Healthy Climate Bill, I think we offered you one of these cards when you came in. If you haven't filled one out, please do. They're on the back table now. What we're going to be doing is going up to Salem on the 3rd, which I'll get to in a second, and we'll be passing these on to our representatives to demonstrate that there is profound concern in Southern Oregon for passing the Healthy Climate Bill. If you're interested in joining us at a rally in Salem on February the 3rd, then please let us know. We'll make sure you are aware of the travel times. The rally on the 3rd is from noon to 1, but it's going to be followed by lobby visits to our representatives. If you're interested in joining us in Salem and visiting representatives, what we're encouraging you to do is to come to one of the 2 prep sessions where we talk about a bit about the bill and then how to address the representatives. The first one, the opportunity is on next Monday at 6:30 right here, that first lobby prep session. So you know where it is, right here. And we'll have an in-house Southern Oregon prep session on how to lobby the representatives. If you're interested in testifying at a hearing for the bill, we just heard today that there's going to be a hearing on the Healthy Climate Bill on February the 2nd, of course, also in Salem. And some of us are probably going to go up to that. I'm thinking I'm going to go up and see if I can throw my 2 cents worth of testimony in. But the big rally and advocacy day is on February the 3rd, starting at noon. If you're interested in joining us, please make sure we know so that we can get you on the list and make sure you have information on where the carpools and vans and things are South Medford, one from Grass Pass. And we're going to have a second option for a sort of training session. Actually, in Salem, there's going to be a prep session at 10 o'clock on the 3rd. So folks who want to go up to that session instead of the one here would have to leave here earlier. So we're going to have two caravans of vehicles leaving from each place, one early and one late. I'm a big fan of the late leaving. And you have the card, so please, if you're interested in, if you're interested in our using your name to demonstrate support for the bill down here, please fill this out. Leave it to us, with us, and we'll take them with us and make sure our representatives get them.
One last comment on that. There's some cards that are a little different on the back table, and it tells you those dates, but it also tells you contact people. So if you're interested in picking one of those up, they're also on the back table. The reason we're so interested in the Healthy Climate Bill, one, we were interested last session, but when we had the Climate Summit, a lot of our big speakers were talking about the need to do something like this. So we're trying to really encourage people from Southern Oregon to be a part of this effort to get this through this session.